Hey everyone, welcome back to another taxonomy video. In this video, we're going to look at phylum Chordata. This is the last phylum we need to know in kingdom Animalia for the DAT. So this phylum Chordata is very widespread. You have reptiles, amphibians, birds, fish, and mammals found within this phylum. We refer to these animals as chordates. Now chordates are triploblastic, they have a coelom, and they are deuterostomes. The only two phyla that we've looked at that are deuterostomes are going to be chordates and echinoderms, so echinodermata. That means that their anus forms first from the blastopore. Chordates, because they are the most advanced phylum out of the 10 Animalia phyla, have bilateral symmetry and they have cephalization. They also have a complete one-way digestive tract with an alimentary canal linking the mouth and the anus together. And they have advanced closed circulatory systems, and we're going to look at the various types of circulatory systems that are expressed within this phylum. And then the last thing is going to be their modes of reproduction. Most chordates in nature are found to be reproducing sexually, but we do have some chordates that reproduce asexually, and we're going to look at this. Chordates have 4 key features that make them a chordate. And these key features are all going to be present at some stage during the developmental process of that species, if not throughout the entire species' life. The first key feature is going to be the notochord. Now this is a flexible rod-like structure that spans the length of the organism, and it provides structural support. If you are a vertebrate, that means you have a vertebral column, and the vertebral column is derived from the notochord. The next key feature is going to be the dorsal hollow nerve cord, and this develops into the central nervous system of most chordates, so it becomes the brain and the spinal cord. The next key feature of a chordate is going to be the pharyngeal slits. These are openings found on the posterior aspect of the oral cavity, so the pharynx, hence the name pharyngeal slits, and these develop into the gills found in fish and the jaw, or they can develop into the inner ear bones in terrestrial chordates. The last key feature of a chordate is going to be the postanal tell. This is posterior to the anus, thus the name postanal tell, and it is an extension of the body in the posterior direction, so towards the caudal end or towards the tail region. It's used for swimming in fish, that makes sense, but it is absent in human beings. You don't have a tell, but we're chordates, so it had to be present during embryonic development. So I thought I would include a diagram to help visualize this. So 2 words that we need to know real quick. Dorsal is towards the back side of the animal, whereas ventral is towards the belly of the animal, so the anterior direction. Okay, so the 4 key features again are the notochord that provides the structural support. So we see the notochord right here in this chordate. We have the dorsal hollow nerve cord, which becomes the spinal column and the brain, so that's just going to be dorsal to that notochord. So here is the dorsal hollow nerve cord. We then have the pharyngeal slits, which are analogous to the gills, which are derived from that, or the inner ear bones. And then the last key feature of a chordate is going to be the postanal tell. So right here we have the anus, and then in the posterior direction, we have the postanal tell, hence the name. And again, these key features are going to be found throughout all of Chordata. So every single animal is going to have these 4 key features present in their adult stage or during their embryological development. So the phylum Chordata can be broken down into 2 main subgroups, invertebrates and vertebrates. Vertebrates have a spinal cord enclosed in vertebrae, and these vertebrae make up the vertebral column, which is derived from the notochord, one of the 4 key features of a chordate. And then as simple as it is, invertebrates do not have this structure and encasement for their spinal cords. These 2 subgroups can further be divided. So under invertebrates, we have Urochordata, also known as the tunicates, and we have Cephalochordata, also known as the lancelets. And then as vertebrates, we have fish, including jawless, cartilaginous, and bony fish. We have amphibians. We have reptiles, birds, and mammals. And there's 3 types of mammals we need to know as well. And those are monotremes, placental mammals, and marsupials. So over the next few videos that we have left for this taxonomy series, we're going to look at each specific group and what makes them unique. But remember that these groups are all found in the phylum Chordata. Let's first learn about the invertebrates because they're relatively the most simple type of chordate. So these are the urochordates, also known as the tunicates. They're referred to as tunicates because they have a carbohydrate outer shell that is referred to as the tunic. Now this tunic can vary in thickness. It can be extremely tough or thin and delicate. Adult tunicates only have the pharyngeal slits present, but going back to being a chordate, they had to have the other three present during embryonic development. So they're still classified as chordates because all of these four key features were present during their larval stage of development. Tunicates are unique because they are sessile. What does sessile mean again? It means that they are dormant. So they are suspension feeders. They have modified pharyngeal slits for nutrient absorption. So they are mobile when they're in the larval stage of development, but then they are non-mobile when they're an adult. One last word that we need to know about tunicates is that they are benthic organisms, also referred to as benthos. So benthic is the bottom of the ocean, and benthos refers to organisms that are benthic. Now tunicates can reproduce both sexually and asexually. So they're hermaphroditic, so they have both types of gametes that they can release. They're also asexual in the fact that they can undergo budding. So tunicates are great examples of a chordate because sometimes students like to think that a chordate has to undergo sexual reproduction, when in fact, you have some chordates like the tunicates that undergo asexual reproduction as well as sexual reproduction. The second group of invertebrates that we need to know are going to be the cephalochordates, also known as the lancelets. Okay, this is kind of confusing, but lancelets are also referred to as amphioxi. Amphioxus is just the singular form. So whenever you hear the word lancelets, amphioxi, amphioxus, cephalochordates, you're just dealing with this subgroup of invertebrates. Now, unlike tunicates, they have all four characteristics of a chordate present even as an adult. But just like tunicates, they have modified pharyngeal slits that are used for filter feeding. Okay, good job guys. Those are the two groups of invertebrates that we need to know. Now we're going to talk about the subgroups under vertebrates and learn how we distinguish between these subgroups. So once again, a vertebrate has the notochord replaced with vertebrae, or in other words, the vertebrae are derived from the notochord. Vertebrae are important because they protect the spinal cord, which is derived from the dorsal hollow nerve cord. Some students mess up and they associate vertebrates with bones, but don't think that way. So vertebrates can have vertebrae made of both bone or cartilage. So bone is not a key characteristic of a vertebrate. We're not just talking about vertebrae here, we're talking about their entire endoskeleton. It can be made up of either bone, like us, or cartilage. And then one last key characteristic of a vertebrate, that dorsal hollow nerve cord, that's going to become the brain, right? So vertebrates have a cranium, either bone or cartilage, which is specialized in the protection of that cephalized brain. Vertebrates vary in their methods of producing offspring. There are three terms that we need to know that describe offspring production. So a vertebrate can be described as a viviparous animal, an oviparous animal, or an ovoviviparous animal. So animals that are viviparous have their offspring developed inside the mother. So the mother is providing the nutrients and the gas exchange. And then when it's time to birth the young, they give live birth to their offspring. Oviparous animals, on the other hand, lay eggs. So young hatch from eggs outside of the mother's body. So this means, of course, that they are not connected to their mother. So all the nutrients that they need for growth and development come from inside the egg. Ovoviviparous animals, on the other hand, are kind of a mix between viviparous and oviparous. So the young hatch from eggs inside the mother's body, but the embryo is not connected to the mother in any way, so it has to rely on the contents found within the egg for nutrients for its development. When it's developed, it's going to hatch, and then the mother births the young. Now, many students struggle with keeping these words straight and their definitions correct because they look so similar. These words are so similar to each other. So to help with that, here's some tips. So both viviparous and ovoviviparous contain the letters VI, VI. So just memorize that whenever you see VI, VI, that means that they birth their live young. And then a way to distinguish oviparous from viviparous is oviparous has an O in it, and it looks like an egg to me. It's dumb, but it works. Same with ovoviviparous. It has an O, and that O looks like an egg. So offspring produced from oviparous or ovoviviparous animals live inside an egg, and that's where they're getting their nutrients from. Okay, the next thing we should know is the types of heart chambers found within vertebrates. So vertebrates are very advanced. They have a closed circulatory system, and their circulatory systems vary in terms of their heart chambers. So two-chambered animals are going to be fish, three-chambered animals are going to be reptiles and amphibians, and then four-chambered animals are going to be mammals and birds. So the word chamber is referring to either the ventricle or the atrium or atria. So ventricles are responsible for pumping blood out of the heart, and then the atria are responsible for receiving blood into the heart. Let's take an in-depth look at the various heart chambers. Okay, first up, let's look at two-chambered hearts. So these are going to be the hearts found within fish. So a fish heart has one atrium and one ventricle. So two chambers, hence the name. Both of these chambers are going to give and receive deoxygenated blood that I colored in blue. The ventricles are going to be responsible for pumping the blood towards the gills. Countercurrent gas exchange happens at the gills, and that's where you get oxygenated blood. So now we have red blood, it's oxygenated. This blood is going to be carried to the various tissues through the body capillaries where it becomes deoxygenated. And then this blood is sent back to the atrium, back to the heart, then it's sent to the ventricle, and the ventricle pumps it back to the gills, and the process begins again. So that is a two-chambered heart in fish. Now we get to three-chambered hearts. These are the hearts found within reptiles and amphibians. So their hearts have two atria and one shared ventricle. Thus you have three chambers. What's unique here is that shared ventricle has a mix of both oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood. So you have both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mixing here. That's why I colored it in purple. So the first atrium is going to dump deoxygenated blood into the ventricle, and the ventricle is going to contract, sending both the deoxygenated blood and the oxygenated blood to the body capillaries. And then this deoxygenated blood is going to be sent back to the heart through that atrium. So you can think of it like this ventricle is pumping in two spots. It's pumping towards the capillaries to oxygenate the tissues, but it's also pumping to the respiratory system, either the lungs or the gills, and that's where the blood is getting oxygenated. Then it's received back into the second atrium, and that second atrium is what's responsible for dumping oxygen-rich blood into the ventricle, where it's mixing with oxygen-poor blood from the first atrium. So the unique thing here is that the blood is mixing due to the sharing of one ventricle. Okay, let's look at the last type of heart, and that's a four-chambered heart. Again, this is found in mammals and birds. So we're mammals and we have a four-chambered heart. So there's both two atria and two ventricles present here, hence the name four-chambered. Another thing that's unique is the ventricles and atria are completely isolated from each other, so there's no mixing of blood. To do this, we have two circuits. We have a pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit. So deoxygenated blood is received into the atrium, so atrium number 1, and that's sent to ventricle number 1. This ventricle is going to pump blood to the lungs. It is here that we receive oxygenated blood. Our blood gets oxygenated. This oxygenated blood is then sent back to the heart, and it's received in the second atrium. Now this atrium is going to send its blood to the second ventricle. This ventricle is responsible for pumping blood throughout the entire body. So all the blood that's oxygenated is going to be sent to the body capillaries where it will become deoxygenated, and then it's sent back to the heart via venous flow. And then this process begins again. This is the most efficient type of heart because there's no mixing of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood.